I told you didn't need coffee. So good morning, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. Welcome back to the classroom. More than any other thing I want to introduce today, I'm just so excited to have classrooms back in session. You guys have been so awesome, socially distanced, wearing masks, wearing face shields, so you guys all rock. It's so nice to have students back in where we can share some of the coolest scientists, explorers, and conservationists around the world. So for our classes joining live, welcome in. That's awesome. For anyone tuning in on YouTube or Facebook, just ask questions in the chat bar. Let me know where you're joining from. We'd love to get a sense of where all our viewers are tuning in from. Today, I'm particularly excited for a number of reasons. First, we are continuing with our theme of marine plastics and microplastics. This is something that we always dive in on in September. It's a hugely topical issue right now, and we're really excited to get to highlight some of the threats that the ocean is facing, some of the challenges that we have with this issue in general, and some of the solutions that you guys can enact at home. Partnered with that today, we are getting a chance to talk about some of the coolest creatures in the world. So we're bringing in Dr. Germanov. She is joining us in Newfoundland. Typically, she's joining us from some amazing remote locale in the middle of some of the most beautiful seas on Earth. Today, a little bit different, but we're really excited to have her share her story of the Marine Megafauna Foundation, which is committed to saving some of the most incredible large organisms in the ocean, whale sharks, manta rays, and more. And so today, she's going to talk about her own work and how microplastics are linked to some of the threats facing some of those megafauna. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Ellie, and take us away.
Hi, nice to see everybody here, and I'm really excited to talk to you guys about manta rays and some of my research. So I just want to a little bit tell you about how I got into what I do. So after I finished my high school, I went and studied biochemistry. So I spent quite a lot of time in the laboratory, kind of like your typical science researcher. But in my spare time, I picked up scuba diving as a hobby. And it's through scuba diving that I had some of the most amazing encounters with large marine animals, which we call megafauna. And here's a photo of me having a good time with some mantas in Komodo National Park in Indonesia. And it's through my love for scuba diving and my love for science that I decided to combine my two loves and my skills and become a conservation biologist. So that's when I joined the Marine Megafauna Foundation and started to do some serious studies on manta rays and some of the threats that they face. So it's not just me that's involved. I'm just one little piece of the puzzle. I have a wonderful team of researchers and conservationists that are basically found all over the world. So we don't get to see each other as much as we like, but they're a fantastic team. So they deserve recognition as well. And what brings us all together is our love for large ocean giants. So like Joe was saying, manta rays are one of the largest fish in the sea. So they're actually the largest ray. And we also studied whale sharks, which are the largest fish and the largest shark as well. Really, really neat, big filter feeders. So that's one thing that they both have in common. So here are some photos of our large filter feeders, manta rays and whale sharks basically eating. So you can see they've got a really big mouth, and basically what they do is when they are swimming through the water column, they are taking in plankton and tiny little bits of organisms which make up their diet. So here's a little photograph of what these microscopic organisms look like. But because they are some of the largest fish on the planet, they have to eat quite a lot in order to maintain their large size and get energy to do what they need to. So for manta rays, we're looking at about 90 cubic meters or 90 tons of water per hour. And for whale sharks, it's more than 300 even. So if you're having a hard time imagining what that looks like, here is 1 ton of water. So multiply that by 90 or 300. So you can see that it very, very quickly fill up the room that you're in. So that's what they are having to filter in an hour feeding in order to get enough of that tiny zooplankton and other microscopic organisms. So manta rays are pretty neat. When you observe them in their natural environment, they have a couple of different strategies for feeding. So the surface feeding photo, like you've seen already, but some of them also do some really neat stuff called barrel rolling, where they basically just turn upside down and feed that way, and bottom feeding as well. And for the whale sharks, they are usually swimming near the surface, kind of opening up their mouth and closing it, so gulping as they go. And they can also do some interesting kind of vertical feeding as well, where they are almost standing up straight, it looks like, in the water and gulping that way. Okay, so we get these creatures basically all around the world, but they do prefer warmer tropical and subtropical waters. So we can see them around the Atlantic coast. I heard a lot of you guys are tuning in from Canada, but also in the Indian Ocean. I've heard some people tuning in from India as well, and in the areas where I normally work around Indonesia, which is just down here between Australia and Asia. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about one of the threats that we think may be impacting these large filter feeders. So it is Plastic Week, but we're going to bring it down and talk about some of the smallest plastics called the microplastics. And what scientists normally when they say microplastics, what they normally mean are plastics that are smaller than 5 millimeters in size. So something like smaller than your pencil eraser. But we also are concerned about some of the larger size classes as well, because they can also be found in the water where manta rays and whale sharks are feeding. So for my studies, because of the net that I use and what I was capable of observing with my eye, we're kind of looking at this size range. So slightly smaller than slightly larger than microplastics as well. Oh, and in this little photograph here below, you can see a couple of different pieces of microplastic, and then you can also see some of these zooplankton. So these are copepods, they're a type of zooplankton, and you can see that they're very similar in size to the microplastics that we find in the manta ray and whale shark feeding grounds. So the problem with plastic, so as it spends time in the environment, it breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces, hence the microplastics. That's how they become so small. And it's through the sun and the waves and other chemical and physical processes that we get a breakdown of plastic. So these plastic pieces are small enough to now be within the size that small fish and even larger fish like manta rays and whale sharks can easily ingest. So it's possible that these pieces of plastics can be eaten by small fish, and then those fish in turn are preyed upon by some of the larger fish, and some of those fish might actually end up on our own dinner plate. So we know already that a number of different fish that we eat have plastics in their digestive systems. So the problem with plastic is not just that it's not something that we normally eat and it's an undigestible material that can build up in our digestive systems and make food absorption or the ability for us to get all the nutrients that we need from food not as efficient. It can block up our digestive system or of other organisms. But some of these plastics, because of the manufacturing during how they're made, they have a number of different chemicals put into them, or also able to absorb chemicals from the water. And these chemicals can be toxic. So some of the worries that scientists have is that by ingesting plastic, we're actually ingesting toxic pieces of undigestible material. So this is a photograph of what the water looks like during certain times of the year in our study sites in Indonesia. So you can see right away, you don't need a microscope, that there is quite a lot of plastic there. And these are some of the big pieces that after time will turn to small pieces. So we currently have an estimated 5 trillion pieces of plastic that are floating in the ocean, and some studies estimate that to be even much more than that. but it's not evenly it's not evenly found around the world. Some places concentrate plastic to higher levels than others. So we have our 5 rotating currents, also called the oceanic gyres. So we've got one in the Atlantic Ocean, in the Pacific Ocean, the North and the South, and also in the Indian Ocean. So you can see down here at the bottom of the screen, these big arrows indicate these rotating currents. And then in this map here of the world, you'll see that some parts of the sea are colored a darker red, and some are colored blue. So the darker red tells us that these places have more plastic pollution than others. So you can see that the plastic pollution actually overlaps with these large rotating currents. So this is where we can expect to see the most plastic pollution. Places like the Mediterranean Sea are heavily polluted in plastic, but also areas that are nearby what we call the Coral Triangle region, which is our richest marine biodiversity on the planet. Basically, the most species of marine creatures live there. Some of these areas, especially the coastal areas, are also quite heavily polluted. And we now know that a lot of our marine plastic actually comes from this part of the world. So the Coral Triangle region is a really fantastic part of the world. Like I said, it has our highest marine biodiversity, so 76% or over 600 species of our corals, and 37% or over 2,000 species of reef fish make the Coral Triangle home. And the countries that are within the Coral Triangle are Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, and East Timor. So quite far away from many of us. But what's important to remember is that not only is this our legacy for marine biodiversity, but this area also supports the livelihoods or the jobs and the ability to live for over 120 million people. So it's a very important part of the world that we definitely need to protect and conserve and try to limit the amount of pollution that's there. So what we also know is from some studies that by 2050, plastic is actually thought that it will outnumber fish by weight. So if you weigh all the fish in the sea and you weigh all the plastic in the sea, plastic is supposed to be have higher weight. So these are some of the statistics that scientists have projected or have estimated will be in the future that we are working really hard to prevent from happening. And we don't need to look far into the future to know that plastic pollution is not good for our marine life. We already know that 90% of our seabirds are ingesting plastic, and those numbers are projected to increase as well. Between 18 to 30%, so up to one third of the fish that we eat has already been documented to have plastic within its digestive systems. From sea turtles, we have 7 different species around the world, and we all know that all 7 of them are impacted by plastic. And for me, one of the kind of really important findings that we should be paying attention to is that zooplankton, those tiny microscopic organisms, the very same ones that manta rays and whale sharks feed on, can ingest the smallest types or eat the smallest types of plastic. And in some parts of the world, we actually have plastic outnumbering plankton by 6 times. So we can find more plastic than plankton. Okay, so now we're going to look into a couple of the animals of interest. So we've got whale sharks. So I've put in where whale sharks are found with little dashed lines. So you can see that where the dashed lines overlap with the orange-pink areas are areas where whale sharks are likely to be ingesting plastic. And we can look at the same way with manta rays, now using these hatched shading, and we can see that the Coral Triangle area, as well as other parts of the Indian and Pacific Ocean, are places where manta ray habitats, or where they're found, overlap with plastic pollution. So this is not great news because manta rays and whale sharks already face a number of challenges. They are considered to be threatened with extinction, and they are on the IUCN Red List listed as such. So the Red List is our global, basically, measure for how all different species are doing. So if you're ever interested in different species, you can always go on the Red List website and type them in and see how they're doing. But the good news is a lot these animals are also, manta rays and whale sharks, are also protected by a number of different treaties. So they do have the best conservation in terms of global protection that we can. But now we have to look into some of their other threats. So this is where plastic pollution comes in. So here's a little video of me at one of the manta ray feeding grounds. And as you can see, along with grass and other natural debris, we have plastic. So I'm just picking up a few of the pieces just to show everybody what kind of stuff we're talking about. And most of it is visible by your naked eye, so you don't need a microscope to see it. And now I'm just dipping my head under and having a look for those mantas. And sure enough, there they are. They are swimming and feeding. And you can see that they're actually feeding very close or within some of the plastic there. And what you see on the right side of the screen, all these bubbles are made by scuba divers. So these are people who take tanks of air underwater with them, and they're there to observe the manta rays. So some of these people come from all over the world. So it's amazing that people come from all over the world to observe these manta rays swimming around the wild, but are unfortunately seeing how they're swimming around in our plastic waste. So this is something that I really wanted to challenge and to bring attention to. And here's another photograph that was really striking that a friend of mine shared with me of a very polluted manta ray feeding area where this poor little manta was trying to get its lunch, but tried to avoid the plastic. So that kind of made me think about how to tackle this problem. And the first thing I needed to do was to be able to have some good solid information about how many pieces of plastic or how much plastic is found in the feeding grounds for manta rays and whale sharks, and whether I can make some kind of estimate on how many pieces they might actually be ingesting. So we chose 3 different locations. 2 of them are manta ray feeding grounds in Bali and in Komodo, and then the other one is a whale shark feeding ground in Java. And I headed out with a team of researchers from Indonesia and some volunteers from around the world. And we basically used a large net, as you can see in the left picture, which we rigged to tow from our boat. So we basically dragged this big net from our boat, and it has a device inside called a flow meter, which is able to calculate how much water we're sampling. So then we can get an estimate of how many pieces of plastic we have per cubic meter or per ton of water. And while we were towing the net, if we saw manta rays feeding, we would also enter the water and sample with a smaller net a bit closer to the animals. We don't get too close because we don't want to disturb their natural behavior, but we don't want to bring the boat in close enough. So in this way, we can get a little bit closer and sample the water directly from where they're feeding. And we also counted the visible plastic that we saw floating around the surface to get some visual estimates. We then take all these samples back to the lab. We use a microscope to basically count and categorize the different pieces of plastic that we see. We note their color and their type, and then we also get some estimates of plastic pollution, either floating or what we collected. And we tested if there was any difference. We looked into plastic in both the rainy season, when we get most of the rainfall, because where we are in the Coral Triangle, we basically have 2 seasons. One is mostly rain, and the other one is mostly sun. So one of them is we call the rainy season, the other the dry, and we wanted to see whether there's any difference in the amount of plastic then. So here's another video. This one is from the Komodo National Park, our other feeding site. And again, we can see that these manta rays, and you can see all the little plankton going right into their mouth, and that's me sampling the water there. So yeah, you can see that there are definitely some larger pieces of plastic, but we weren't sure about the small pieces yet. And here are some of our research team heading out to do some sampling. And what we basically found, looking at what we could see with our naked eye, was that during the rainy season, we have a lot more plastic, 29,000 pieces per kilometer squared, compared to only 600 pieces per kilometer squared in a dry season. And these photos of our team show you how it's a little bit different during the wet season, where and the dry season, kind of gray skies versus bright blue skies. So you might have seen this video of a friend of ours. It was very famous about a year ago, where he was swimming also in the Manta Ray feeding ground, and basically was swimming with a load of trash and plastic waste. So this is actually happening during the wet season as well. So what this tells us, and we know from some other studies that looked at the amount of waste that come from rivers, is that rivers are an important piece of this puzzle. They are key to solving this problem. Most of the waste, about 80% of our plastic pollution, is estimated to actually come from land, and it gets into the sea through rivers. So if we can figure out ways to prevent plastic waste from entering the sea from rivers, then we are on our way to reducing plastic pollution. So improving basically waste management, or areas where we are placing our waste so that it's not nearby rivers, and cleaning up these rivers will go a long way towards that. So we also wanted to look into the type of plastic that we found and see which types of plastic we need to be cutting down on. And the most common type of plastic we call soft or film, and this is plastic bags and plastic wrappers. This is the most common types of plastic we found. So by cutting down on the use of plastic bags, you are already helping quite a lot. Other types of plastic that we found are hard. So think about plastic forks, plastic utensils, straws, bottle caps, and things like that. So there are some other ways that we can reduce what we use in our homes in order to reduce what we see out into the marine environment. So the most common types of plastic that we found in all of the 3 sites were film, so these soft kind of plastic coming from packages, and fragments, some of these harder plastic items coming from plastic items that have broken down. And what we've estimated with our study is that manta rays are potentially feeding on up to 63 pieces of plastic per hour, and whale sharks about 137 plastic pieces per hour. And here's some photographs of the type of plastics that we found. You can even see some of them are big enough to have little letters on them. So the next thing we looked into is whether we have any evidence of manta rays actually ingesting the plastic. So what we worked with the local divers, and we asked them that if we see manta rays pooping, and we do see that sometimes, to please collect up that poop in a little sample tube and bring it back to us to the lab to look into. So from what you see here in the bottom left corner is a photo of all the different pieces of plastic that we found in one manta ray poop. And this bigger circle here is actually those pieces taken looking at them with a microscope. While we didn't have the chance to collect whale shark poop, we know from other studies around the world that plastic has been found in the stomachs of whale sharks, and in some of the cases might have actually contributed to their perishing. And here are some other photographs of another whale shark, this one from the Philippines, which had a number of different plastic strings and wrappers in its belly. So it seems like this is not great news for manta rays and whale sharks. There's plastic in their feeding grounds, and there are definitely some evidence that they are ingesting it. So what can we do with this? Well, we know that during the rainy season we have more plastic. And we know that plastic comes from rivers, or the majority of it does. So what we need to do is we need to work on reducing the amount of plastic that comes from rivers. So thinking about river cleanups, changing the way that we deposit our waste. We also know what the most common types of plastic we find in the marine environment are. So these are the types of plastic that we should be looking to avoid in our regular lives. And now that we know this, we can actually use manta rays and whale sharks to raise awareness for this cause. So we now because we're so fascinated with them and they're such amazing animals. We want to make sure that they are having healthy lives into the future. So we can use their plight or the fact that they are potentially being impacted by plastic to raise awareness. So we call this a flagship species. And if we protect these large filter feeders, because they have such big habitat ranges, they need a large area of ocean to call home. By protecting that area and making sure that habitat is clean and free of plastic, we are also helping many other species of fish and corals and animals that live there. So we call that the umbrella species. So yeah, some things that we can do. Quit using our single-use plastics. And some of you might have noticed that there is a new single-use plastic, or a couple of different types of new single-use plastic that are now being used because of this year's pandemic, and that is reusable face masks and gloves. So I would say to look into getting a reusable mask that you can wash, or a couple of them that you can wash every day, and practicing good hand washing techniques. So that way you don't actually need to be using gloves. So that will reduce the amount of that waste that we're starting to now see also washing up in some of the beaches and some of the marine environments that these animals use. We can go out and do a beach clean. You can also become a citizen scientist or a riverbed clean. You can also become a citizen scientist, which means that you can participate in any local science projects where you can help scientists collect data on the different animals and plants that they might be studying. More importantly, you should be taking the time to enjoy nature. Spending time outdoors is a great way to make sure that you're a good advocate for nature and to stay healthy. And you can also stay in touch with us at the Marine Megafauna Foundation. Tomorrow is actually the very first World Manta Day. So we're going to be having a number of different activities going on there. So you should definitely check out our website and check out our social media pages. So yeah, I just want to say thank you to all the different people that have helped along in the project along the way. Park rangers, scientists, volunteers, students. Really wouldn't have been possible without them, and the funders as well. So with that, I say thank you guys, and I'm happy to take any questions from you, or just chat about mantas or plastic.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ellie. If you want to end your screen share, then we can have a bit of a conversation. You can see us again. That would be awesome. But thank you so much for an amazing presentation. On YouTube or Facebook, and you want to share questions in the chat bar, please do so. Don't be shy. We'd love to see what you guys have to share. But I'm going to start by going to Miss Saunders' class in North Bay. So if you guys want to come on in, guys. Anyone has a question there? Come on up.
How much plastics do whale sharks eat a year?
A year? Okay. Well, depends probably where they are. But we know that whale sharks feed for about 7 hours a day. So if they're feeding if we're looking at Java, the location where I studied, if they're getting 137 pieces per day, per hour, and you times that by 7, what do you get? Let's get my calculator out. And then you times that by how many days in a year? 365.
It's going to be a lot.
Okay, 137 times 7 times 365, 3,500 pieces. That sounds like a lot.
That is a lot. Plastic. We don't want to eat that for lunch at homes wherever we are. So that's a crazy amount of plastic. And again, this is it's a disheartening talk, but it's one that we can highlight some of the solutions for, and you did that at the end. So great first question to kick us off, guys. I'm going to go to Akash, joining us all the way in India. So Akash, welcome back in, man. If you have a question for us, just mute your mic.
Hi, my name is Akash, and I just wanted to ask you a question, that is, are there any starting symptoms, or do we get any symptoms when we humans or manta rays have consumed or ingested microplastics before knowing that it's too late?
That's a really good question, and we're just starting to learn more about it. There was actually a study last year that looked at human poop, and it did find some plastic pieces in the human poop. But so far, we don't see any major symptoms or major problems, which is good. But there's still definitely a lot that we don't know, and we need to study more.
Yeah. One of the things we like to highlight with marine plastics is that this is such an infant field. I mean, we've only been doing this research for a few decades now, and there's so much more to learn about all these things. So we love your questions. There might be some things that we just don't know, and that's what where you guys can come in and hopefully be future scientists to help explore yourself. That's awesome. We got a great question from Dave joining us, I think, in the UK, and he wants to know about ways of removing plastic from the oceans that's already there. He makes the point that even if we stopped putting any more plastic in the oceans, we still have a serious problem on our hands. So is there any viable technique for getting rid of plastic that's already out there?
Yeah, there's a group of people, I think they're from Australia, and they've developed the Sea Bin project. So this is basically like a bucket with a vacuum suction on it that can be used in places where we are heavily polluted, like ports, also, river mouths where plastic might be just coming out and before it can enter into the ocean. So yeah, these kind of sea bins just are placed around, and they suck up plastic, and then they can be emptied and be put out there again. I know there's a very ambitious project called the Ocean Cleanup that has made some big progress in the last couple of years. Since it was just an idea, they've started to actually put some bigger devices out there to try to collect floating plastic. But we still don't have any really good methods to clean up plastic that has kind of already fallen down towards the seafloor. So what settled on the bottom there. So in many ways, prevention is really the best thing that we can do.
Yep. I'm really glad we got that message in. And so I've put on the screen in the last few minutes both the Ocean Cleanup, which is on right now, and the Sea Bin project. One of the things we highlighted yesterday as a cool prevention technique, if you've never heard of this, Mr. Trash Wheel in the United States. Really cool, really engaging, social media friendly way of cleaning up rivers. So check out Mr. Trash Wheel on the bottom of the screen. It's a really cool project. I hope you guys enjoy. Let me bring back in Miss Saunders' class. If you guys have another question for us, go for it. And anyone else on YouTube wants to share, come on in, guys. Yeah, Miss Saunders' class.
All right, there he is.
Nice shirt.
My name is Winston, and I would like to know, how can young people get involved?
Nice. How can young people get involved, Ellie?
Well, you can make sure that you're taking a lunch to school that is without single-use plastics. You can have your Tupperware containers. You can have your lunch box. So pack your own sandwich, things like that. Don't buy single-use items. Use a bottle for your water instead of other containers that are just going to be thrown away with straws and things like that. So that's already one big thing you can do. When it's safe to do so, you can go do beach cleanups and get other people in your community involved. And you can talk to adults about what you found and help them change their habits at home too.
Outstanding. One thing I'd recommend for the class too, if you check out Ocean Wise's plastics presentation from yesterday, we had like 50 things that you guys can check out. If you're interested in beach cleanups, shorelinecleanup.ca, the great Canadian shoreline cleanup, applicable to all our Canadian classes, but really around the world. A great organization with lots of toolkits and tips to help you do a really effective and fun beach cleanup. So check that out. Ellie, I wanted to pass along a question of my own. You mentioned at the beginning that early stage scuba diving really inspired you to get involved with the ocean. And this is something we hear from so many of our divers, ocean explorers. Can you tell us a little bit about your own experience of scuba diving and maybe when kids might be able to start scuba diving wherever they are at home?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's actually programs for kids as young as 8. We call them bubble makers. They just basically learn how to use the scuba equipment, and they stay in very shallow waters. But the junior open water course, which is the first course that you can take once you're old enough, starts at I believe age 12. Yeah. And so it's a 3-day course, and after that you're allowed to go to 12 meters, which is deep enough to dive with most manta rays. Most manta rays are like shallow water, and then you can build onto it from there.
There you go. And I think all our classes are either right at 12 or a little bit younger than that, but do check that out. There's lots of great dive places, no matter where you are. I know we've got North Bay and Kitchener just joined us, which is fantastic. You'd be amazed at how many dive shops are in places that you wouldn't expect. So go look for them, whether it's a pool or a quarry or a lake. Lots of opportunities out there, and it's really exciting. So Mr. Seeberger just joined us in Kitchener. I know your class schedule is a little off right now, but I wanted to welcome you in. And if you had any questions for us, I know you missed a little bit of the broadcast, but welcome in and take us away if you have any queries.
Thank you. Yeah, so I don't have any particular questions yet, but I guess it might be a repeat of the previous time we met together. Yeah. Basically looking at creating a grant proposal and any advice or sources that we can get to take a look at how we can be successful in creating a good conservational efforts to save species in the area locally, and different resources and grants that might be out there, and maybe an experience that you personally went through in order to receive funding for your research.
I'm just looking up my grant notebook to see if I've got some links to tell you. So I first heard of a website called Terra Viva Grant Directory, and I went there and I started looking at different grants that might be applicable to me. And the ones that I managed to get are from Idea Wild. This is a small equipment grant, but it was enough to fund my plankton net, my flow meter, a GPS. So basically the basic equipment that I needed to do the sampling. And then I also applied to the Patty Foundation, which is from the scuba diving Professional Association Diving Instructors. It's their kind of charity. And they helped me get some funding as well that I can pay for boat rental and some of the other equipment that I needed. So you can have a look at those. If you're in the US, there's grants.gov. And there's a number of different ones from NOAA for marine debris. There's probably ones from Canada as well, but I haven't really looked into them too much because most of the funding that I've been applying for are for developing countries. So, there's a number of different grants for that, Rufford small grants. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Oh, that's really great. It's more like Mr. Seeberger came in the other day. They're doing a really cool project in their class, and just insight into how they go about that, things that they should focus on. That's really amazing stuff. So I passed along Terra Viva grants in the bottom of the screen too, so you can check that out, Mr. Seeberger. And yeah, cool question, guys. Thanks, Ellie. So we've got time for a couple more questions. One thing that I wanted to ask is, you highlighted so many problems facing these amazing animals. Is there a way that you keep really positive about this? Like when we deal with people that are dealing with really steep challenges for ocean wildlife or wildlife in general, I'm just curious what you use or what you think about to keep yourself excited and enthused and positive about it all.
Yeah, so it's hard for me to actually do this talk with kids because I want to make sure that I leave them somehow on a positive note. But okay, so I had my program involved a number of students from the local university in Indonesia, and it was amazing to see how even within a couple of hours of joining the program, they had already changed some of their personal habits. Instead of bringing a plastic water bottle, they had all picked up reusable bottles. They were saying no straws when they're ordering their food. They were bringing their own lunch boxes out to the field site instead of picking up a prepackaged lunch. So that already inspired me that it didn't take long for people to change. And just to see the changes that started happening around in the different businesses, we had a couple of legislative wins in Bali, plastic bag bans and styrofoam container bans and straw bans and things like that. That didn't come overnight, but, happened within the time that I was doing my research. So it seemed that, this wasn't, while it was a battle, it wasn't as uphill as I initially thought it would be.
Yeah. And that's something that we love to highlight about ocean plastics. It's such a It's an issue that no one wants to see there. No one looks at a beach covered in plastic and goes, great. No one looks at a manta ray eating a bunch of plastic and says, how cool is that? So all of us find this a really negative experience, and the things that we can do at home or in our classroom or in our businesses make a really huge difference. So all of you guys can start doing that immediately. There's some great resources out there. Ellie's mentioned a bunch. Oceanwise in their plastics program, National Geographic's Planet Our Plastic. There are tons of ways out there to learn more about how you can take part. So that's really exciting. Thank you so much. I'm going to end off with one more question from Miss Saunders' class and the student waiting there. So come on in and go for it.
Hi, I'm Kathleen, and I was just wondering if you could tell us more about your past education experiences.
Kathleen, could you come a little closer to the camera or to this side of the picture?
I was wondering if you could tell us more about your past education experiences.
Oh,
Nice.
okay. So I was always fascinated with how things work and how our body works. So I started studying microbiology and immunology. So that's basically how our bodies interact with organisms that cause disease and how our immune system fights that disease. So that's what I spent most of my my first 6 years of my education. And what I liked about that is all the different lab skills that I learned and how to test very specific questions. But what was missing for me was kind of the big picture. I wanted to be able to see real results happening with my eyes and be talking with people who can make those changes happen. So that's when I decided to work more in the conservation sphere.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm so glad we got a careers or a school-based question. It's something that we're really focusing on this year, so that's really exciting. Thanks so much to the student. Before we wrap up, and I ask Ellie sort of a last message to wrap us off on, one thing that you mentioned is sort of a love of wildlife, getting out in nature. So I'd be remiss if I didn't take the chance to really briefly talk about our September Backyard Bio program. I think some of the teachers involved in this program are already registered for this, but basically we're encouraging kids all around the world to get out, explore, take photos of nature near them, and share that with us on Twitter, iNaturalist, and in connection with other classrooms. So we've had 4,500 plus observations already on iNaturalist. Pictures pouring in on Twitter, lots of ways to get involved. So we'd love to see your class take part with that if you get a chance over the next few weeks. So with that, Ellie, before we wrap up, is there a last message you want to share about marine plastics, about how kids can get involved, about your love of manta rays, anything you'd like to share with us to end off the broadcast?
Yeah, I just think definitely spend as much time as you can out in nature. We're spending a bit more time in front of screens these days. So just being outside and enjoying the really simple things in life, whether it be a walk by the beach or the river, if it's long as it's safe for you to do so, or in the forest, I think will inspire you to be a really good steward to our planet. And I think that's what we need is more really good stewards.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Germanov. I'm going to bring in everyone in the broadcast in Ms. Saunders' class, Mr. Seeberger, Akash. If you guys want to join me in saying a huge thank you to Elliot. Go for it. Thank you. We'll see you all soon. Thank you so much, and can't wait to keep the learning going for ocean plastics. Check out Marine Megafauna Foundation. Check out our story map for ocean plastics, and we look forward to having you guys back soon.